Moose, and we are going to learn a little bit about selections. Now, I will say that I'm going to be using some keyboard commands just by habit, and I want to make sure that everybody knows what those are. So, like in most programs, Command Z, Z as in zebra, is edit undo. So it is an undo, and it will actually undo about 20 times. It's not infinite like it is in certain programs, and that's actually how far it goes is really dependent upon the amount of RAM you have available on your computer. So keep that in mind. Um, so you'll see me Command Z, also Command D as in David. This is I just made a quick selection with the marquee tool. If I hit Command D, that will drop the selection. So you can also find that under Select, Deselect. And you can see Select All is Command A, Reselect is Shift Command D. You can inverse your selection. There's a bunch of things that you can do. So lots and lots of keyboard commands, but Command D as in David is really, really important to know. Also, another one that's really important to know is Command minus and Command plus. So Command plus zooms in, Command minus zooms out. So you can make the image smaller, you make the image bigger. You can hit the space bar in any tool that you're in except for the type tool, because this type tool will just make spaces. But in the type tool, but besides that, in every other tool, if you move around, if you hold the space bar down and you click, you can move around within it, even if you are actively, well, this won't quite work, but if I'm in the polygon lasso tool and I'm clicking and I need to move, I'm going to hold down the space bar and keep clicking, and I won't lose the selection that I'm working on. So I'm hitting space bar, and then I'm using my trackpad or mouse to move around. I'm making more points. I'm holding the space bar down, and you can see the icon change from the lasso tool, and then when I hit the space bar, it turns into the hand tool. Which allows me to move around so I can find my way back to my starting point and close that selection. So I'm going to Command D to drop that selection. And so I will be doing that a lot. Command minus, Command plus, I'll be using the space bar to move around, Command D to drop it, and Command Z if I make a mistake. So keep that in mind. Definitely know Command Z, Command D, Command minus, Command plus, and the space bar. You'll be doing it all the time in Photoshop. Okay, so there are certain things like that are just extra that that are good to know. Um, but there are some that are essential, and those that I just mentioned are essential keyboard commands for you to know. So let's go up to the marquee tool. So we're going to look at the marquee tool. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this because it's not a tool that I actually use all that often. I don't find it terribly important, but there are some important things to note about it. So the main thing is with all of these, with any kind of rectangle tool in Photoshop or Illustrator, InDesign, when you're drawing out a rectangle, if you're not using any modifier keys, you can make any shape rectangle that you want. If you want to make a perfect square, you need to hold the shift key down, so that'll make a perfect square, so 1-to-1 ratio. You can, in all of the selection tools, they might look a little bit different, but you have all of these options. Notice right now it's a new selection, so if I draw out a new rectangle, it's going to drop the previous one and make a new one. If I'm in the additive selection mode, then when I make a new rectangle, it's going to add that rectangle to the next one. And then as you can probably guess when I'm in subtractive mode, if I hold the subtract key down, or if I pull it a rectangle out with the subtraction button engaged, then it will cut out from it will subtract from the selection. One that I don't use very often, but when I need it, it's awesome to have, is the intersection tool. So that means that if I draw out a rectangle only where the existing selection is and the new selection overlap is what's left over. So I'm going to go ahead and drop that selection, Command D. Then same thing with the marquee tool, the elliptical marquee tool. It's creating a selection. And when it's in new selection mode, it's going to drop it. It's not going to add or subtract or intersect. But when I add that, when I'm in additive mode, it adds to it. If I hold the shift key down, it makes a perfect circle. Then you have your subtractive mode. It can even be a subtraction inside of another object. So you could do something like that. And then you have your overlap mode or the intersect mode where so it has all of those options in there as well. So I'm going to Command D to drop. I'm going to zoom in for this one. The natural lasso tool, which is a continuous line, you actually have to draw that continuous line. This one's really hard to make a good selection unless you're using a some kind of tablet and pen. So Wacom tablet, we have them in class. Those tend to be you're a little bit more successful with using the continuous line lasso tool. So that's the original lasso tool. Also a lasso tool, there's a polygon lasso tool, which has been around since the conception. That is of Photoshop, along with the lasso tool. These are kind of original, but the polygon lasso tool is actually a really fantastic tool. And you don't have to draw a continuous line. It allows you to go point to point. Now notice I'm at about 200% in this document, which is actually fairly zoomed in. This is an iPhone photo, so it's not super high resolution. It's an HCI file, which is not like the highest end image file in the world. So, but normally I'm working, when I'm working on my photographs, I'm somewhere in the 400% to 800% mode when I'm making a selection. That allows me to see, and you can see right here, I didn't make a great selection. I have some of the hair in here, I missed some of the eye up there. So I can go into the additive mode and add that to it. So I just added a little bit to that, and I can also subtract. So if I say, oh, I came out just a hair over here, and I want to remove that, I can go into subtraction mode and clean that up. And maybe I got a little bit too much of that because the eyelid's black, and I didn't want to get the eye. So I just want to get the eye there. So, and maybe I don't want to get the little tear duct area. So I'm going to take that out too. But oops, I want to go back into additive mode because I took out a little bit too much and I want to add that back in. And another thing to note, this is something that I do often, but the additive and subtractive modes the only way to get into those used to be with keyboard commands. So if I wanted to add to a selection, I would hold the shift key down. So I'm holding the shift key down, even though I'm into the new selection mode. So I just added that area. I'm going to Command Z. or I could hit the Alt Option key to subtract. So Shift adds, um, and the Alt Option key subtracts. That even works if I'm in the additive mode here, so I'm not holding any modifiers down. I can add there, but if I wanted to subtract in the additive mode, I would just hold down that Option key and I can go into subtraction mode. In subtraction mode, I can also hold down the Shift key and add and go into additive mode. So those are good keyboard commands to know. They're not essential, but they will save you time. The magic lasso tool, anything again that is called magic is usually fairly unmagical. So opposite of magical. Sometimes this works great. Every once in a while it does, and it has gotten better, but I just find for the most part it's makes kind of a mess. If you're in a really high contrast area, or you have a black or a red object on a white background or something, it does okay. But like in this particular case, it's not great. And so I find with a lot of these, you just end up doing more fixing than if you just started with a polygon lasso tool and did it right from the beginning. So it just depends on how you want to work. But this is not the tool that I would use. This is not my go-to tool. It's not the best tool that's out there. Polygon lasso tool is a better tool. Also, the quick selection tool, which we're going to look at next, is a better tool. But again, you'll see that it has the new selection, additive, subtractive, and intersect all just like we looked at before. Now, when we go to the quick selection tool, I'm going to drop this. This is a different tool. You do not have intersect, but you do have additive and subtractive. It just looks a little bit different. It has the brush icon with a plus and the brush icon with a minus. And so with this, I'm in additive mode. How selective this is based on the size of the brush. So you can change the size of the brush. If you make size of the brush smaller, it's going to be more selective. If where it's going to want to grab things closer to it. If you have a bigger brush, it's going to tend to be less selective. And you can also just move faster with the big one, but you can also make way more mistakes. So I'm holding down the Alt key, Alt Option key, and I am taking some of this stuff out. So there is, you kind of got to massage it into space. I also use the bracket key. So the left bracket key makes makes the brush smaller. The right bracket key makes the brush bigger, smaller, left bracket, bigger, right bracket. So that right bracket on your keyboard should be right diagonally underneath the delete button. This is actually a pretty hard selection because Moose is brown and he is on a kind of brownish background, so it's really having a hard time. Now you can see his muzzle, even with his muzzle, it's picking up some of the shadow. So I do find that using the polygon lasso tool, even though it does take time to use to go point to point around the figure, I do find that it tends to do a better job. So those are your three selection tools that you have. There's also the magic wand tool, again, not magical, magic wand tool. It selects areas within a tolerance. So if I reduce my tolerance, it's going to become more selective. If I increase my tolerance, it is going to be less selective and pick a bigger area. So you can see on here, it picked, because I had the tolerance up to 60, it picked even though I clicked in the same place as the last time, it picked it all the way went down to his leg. If I Command Z and I take that down to 20, and I click in that same spot, it's only selecting things that are closer in range. So it's going to do a smaller selection. It will, if you zoom in, you can see that it has all these little marks and stuff in it, and that's just not good because you'll miss some of these. So again, you'll get kind of a wholly patchy selection. So it's not great. I have used it for some creating some like posterization effects and things like that, but it's or torn paper effect, but it is for the most part of doing like a refined selection isn't the best. So those are your selection tools. Use them wisely. The next up, we're going to look at how we can take that selection and use refined mask to make it an even better selection. So we'll look at that next.